The final judgment ambassador, Elena Vasquez, stood before the towering crystalline structure that housed the Galactic Tribunal. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the datapad containing humanity's final appeal. The morning sun of Nexus. Prime cast rainbow patterns through the crystal walls, but Elena found no beauty in the sight. Today would determine whether humanity earned its place among the stars or faced something far worse than rejection. Captain Marcus Chun paced the bridge of the exploration vessel Pioneer's Dream, stationed in orbit above the tribunal world. His weathered face showed the strain of 3 sleepless nights. The entire human delegation had been confined to their ships during the deliberations, watching helplessly as their fate was decided by beings they barely understood. Marcus had spent 30 years exploring the galaxy's edge, discovering new worlds and making first contact with dozens of species. None of that experience had prepared him for this moment. The tribunal chamber itself was a marvel of engineering that reflected the advanced nature of the 15 species that governed galactic civilization. Each species had contributed their greatest architectural achievements to create a space that was both functional and deeply symbolic. The Etherian section floated without visible support, defying gravity through pure mental energy. The crystalline hegemony's area pulsed with geometric patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The bio-collective's living walls breathed and shifted, covered in organisms that served as both decoration and recording devices. Elena had been chosen as humanity's representative, not because she was their most skilled diplomat, but because she possessed something the other candidates lacked. She genuinely believed that humanity deserved to join this ancient alliance. Her parents had been among Earth's first deep space explorers, and she had grown up hearing stories of the wonders that waited beyond their solar system. When humanity finally developed faster than light travel and discovered they were not alone, Elena saw it as the fulfillment of every dream her species had ever had about the stars. The preliminary hearings had not gone well. The Zenth Empire, with their rigid hierarchy and precise social structures, viewed humans as chaotic and unpredictable. They pointed to humanity's history of warfare and environmental destruction as evidence that they were unfit for galactic citizenship. The harmonic collective, beings of pure energy who valued perfect order above all else, were disturbed by humanity's tendency toward individual expression and creative thinking. Even the more tolerant species like the wandering clans expressed concerns about humanity's rapid technological development and aggressive expansion into unclaimed territories. Dr. Sarah Mitchell worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the research ship Scientific Endeavor, trying to complete her analysis of the quantum resonance patterns that governed faster than light communication. Sarah had dedicated her life to understanding the fundamental forces that held the galaxy together, believing that scientific achievement would prove humanity's worth to the galactic community. Her discoveries about subspace manipulation had already impressed several alien scientists, but she feared it might not be enough to overcome the political opposition to human membership. The tribunal's deliberation had lasted for 72 hours. Elena had used that time to walk through the observation galleries, studying the alien delegates and trying to understand their perspectives. The collective minds shared thoughts instantly across vast distances, making them suspicious of species that required verbal communication. The Ancient Ones had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, making them cautious about admitting new members who might disrupt the careful balance they had spent millennia creating. Commander Robert Hayes monitored communications from his position aboard the military escort vessel Guardian's Shield. His orders were clear but contradictory. Protect the human delegation at all costs, but avoid any action that might be interpreted as aggressive or threatening. Robert had served in 3 different conflicts along the human frontier, always fighting against the unknown dangers that lurked in unexplored space. He understood the value of strength and preparedness, But he also recognized that sometimes the greatest courage lay in restraint. The call finally came as Elena stood in her quarters, watching the alien ships move through the space around Nexus Prime. Each vessel represented technologies and cultures that humanity was only beginning to comprehend. The Void Dancer's ships seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. The Starshapers traveled in massive constructs that looked more like small planets than spacecraft. The sight filled Elena with both wonder and a deep sadness at what humanity might be losing. Elena made her way back to the tribunal chamber, her steps echoing through corridors that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic history. The walls themselves seemed to judge her, their alien geometries serving as a constant reminder that humanity was the newcomer here, the one species that did not yet belong. She passed monuments to great alliances and historic treaties, each one representing the careful balance that kept hundreds of species living in relative peace. The tribunal members took their positions as Elena entered the chamber. High Arbiter Zenth Tal of the Zenth Empire remained motionless, his insectoid features revealing nothing of his thoughts. The Harmonic Collective's representative appeared as a shifting column of light and sound, beautiful but impossible to read. The ancient one known as Memory Keeper sat in meditation, her 1,000-year-old eyes closed as she communed with the collective wisdom of her people. Elena activated her translator and began the ritual greeting that had been used for millennia. Each species had contributed phrases to the ceremony, creating a linguistic tapestry that represented their unity despite their differences. As she spoke the ancient words, Elena thought about the human children back on Earth who were learning their first words, never knowing that their entire future might be decided by this single conversation. High Arbiter Zenthal rose to deliver the tribunal's decision. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority as the translation systems converted his words into human language. The judgment had been reached through careful consideration of humanity's achievements, potential, and the risks they presented to galactic stability. Every species had been given the opportunity to present their arguments, and every concern had been weighed against the possible benefits of human membership. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Zenth Tal spoke the words that would change everything. The tribunal had voted to reject humanity's application for membership, but that was not the end of their judgment. Humanity was deemed too dangerous and unpredictable to exist within the established galactic borders. They were hereby banished to the void sectors, the empty regions beyond the galaxy's edge, where space itself was hostile to most forms of life. Elena felt the chamber spinning around. Hers, the full implications became clear. This was not mere rejection. This was exile on a scale that no species had ever faced before. Humanity would be stripped of their exploration rights, their trade agreements, and their access to the technologies that had made their expansion possible. They would be given 60 days to evacuate all human presence from the established galaxy and relocate to the dead regions, where they could harm no one but themselves. Captain Marcus Chon received the news as he stood on the Bridge of Pioneers. Dream, surrounded by officers who had dedicated their lives to exploring the galaxy in humanity's name. The communications officer, Lieutenant Lisa Park, openly wept as she transmitted the tribunal's decision to the human fleet. Navigation Officer Tom Williams stared at his star charts, trying to comprehend a future where all those carefully mapped systems would be forbidden to human ships. The void sectors were legendary among galactic civilizations, not as places of opportunity, but as regions of death. The space between galaxies was filled with dark matter storms, quantum anomalies, and gravitational distortions that could tear apart the strongest ships. Most species had sent automated probes into the void, only to lose them to phenomena that defied scientific explanation. Now humanity was being ordered to make that hostile emptiness their new home. Asterisk. Dr. Sarah Mitchell received the news in her laboratory, where she was surrounded by the fruits of human scientific achievement. Her quantum resonance experiments had opened new possibilities for faster-than-light travel, but now those discoveries would be put to the ultimate test. If humanity was going to survive in the void, they would need technologies that pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Commander Robert Hayes immediately began calculating the logistics of moving humanity's entire space population to the void sectors. The numbers were staggering. Millions of humans lived and worked throughout the galaxy, from mining operations in distant star systems to research stations in the galactic core. Evacuating them all within 60 days would require a coordination effort unlike anything in human history. Elena made one final attempt to appeal the decision, but High Arbiter Zenthal's response was absolute. The tribunal had spoken, and their judgment was final. Humanity had been given a chance to prove their worthiness, and they had been found wanting. The galaxy would be safer without the chaos and unpredictability that seemed to follow humans. Wherever they went, Elena gathered her dignity and formally accepted the tribunal's decision, knowing that resistance would only make things worse for her people. As the human delegation prepared to leave Nexus Prime, Elena took one last look at the crystalline spires that housed the galactic government. Somewhere in those towers, representatives of 15 different species were probably congratulating themselves on solving the human problem. They had no idea that they had just given humanity the greatest gift in the galaxy: freedom from their rules, their limitations, and their fear of change. Captain Marcus Chon set course for the void sectors, leading a convoy of human ships into the darkness between galaxies. Behind them lay everything humanity had dreamed of achieving among the stars. Ahead lay the unknown, hostile, and completely empty. But as Marcus watched his crew prepare for the journey, he saw something that the tribunal had failed to recognize. Humans had always done their best work when their backs were against the wall. Empire in the darkness. 75 years had passed since the Great Exile, and Chancellor David Park stood in the command center of New Genesis, humanity's mobile capital ship. The massive vessel dwarfed anything the Galactic Council had ever constructed, yet it moved through space with grace that would shame their finest engineering. Through the panoramic windows, David could see the sprawling fleet that had grown around humanity's wandering civilization. What had begun as a desperate exodus had become something the galaxy had never seen before. Admiral Sarah Kim materialized beside him as a holographic projection, her image transmitted instantaneously across the vast distances between human fleets. Sarah commanded the Phantom Division, humanity's most advanced military force. From her flagship Invisible Hand, the ship existed in a state of quantum uncertainty, phasing between dimensions to avoid detection by conventional sensors. It was just one of countless innovations that had emerged from humanity's forced isolation in the void. David's weathered face reflected the journey humanity had taken since their exile. As a young engineer on one of the evacuation ships, he had watched his home galaxy disappear behind them as they entered the dark regions between star systems. Now, at 73, he ruled an empire that spanned multiple galactic clusters and commanded resources that would make the old council weep with envy. The void that was supposed to kill them had instead become the foundation of their greatest achievement. Dr. James Liu entered the command center carrying a datapad that contained his latest breakthrough. James had been just a graduate student when the exile began, but 75 years of necessity had transformed him into humanity's leading expert on quantum fold technology. His innovations had given human ships the ability to travel distances in hours that would take council vessels centuries. The old galaxy was no longer unreachably far away. It was simply irrelevant. The quantum fold drive had been born from desperation during humanity's first decade in the void. Traditional faster-than-light travel required specific gravitational conditions that simply did not exist in empty space. Human ships had been stranded in a region where the laws of physics themselves seemed different from anything they had experienced before. James and his team had been forced to literally rewrite their understanding of space and time to develop propulsion systems that could function in their new environment. Sarah's military briefing revealed the scope of what humanity had accomplished. In their exile, the Phantom Division alone consisted of over 10,000 ships, all equipped with technologies that made them invisible to conventional detection methods. More impressive still, humanity had discovered they were not the only exiles in the void. The rejected consortium, as they had come to be known, included 17 different species that had been banished from the galaxy for various crimes. Against cosmic order, the Forge Masters had been exiled for their dangerous experiments with stellar engineering. The Dream Weavers were cast out for their ability to manipulate reality through collective consciousness. The Time Singers had been banished for their refusal to accept linear causality. Each species had brought their own unique capabilities to humanity's growing alliance, creating a technological and cultural fusion that surpassed anything the galaxy proper had ever achieved. Chancellor David Park had been elected to his position not through political maneuvering, but because he possessed the vision to see what humanity could become in their exile. Under his leadership, the Human Confederation had grown from a collection of refugee ships into a sovereign power that controlled resources across multiple galactic regions. Human mining operations harvested exotic matter from the void itself, while human research stations had unlocked secrets of physics that the Council could not even comprehend. Dr. Liu's latest breakthrough promised to revolutionize human expansion even further. His team had successfully created stable wormholes that could connect distant regions of space without requiring the massive energy expenditures of traditional gate networks. The implications were staggering. Humanity could now establish colonies in any region of the universe, regardless of distance or accessibility through normal spacetime. Admiral Kim's intelligence reports painted a picture of growing instability within the Galactic Council. The same rigid thinking that had led to humanity's exile was now causing problems that their careful bureaucracy could not solve. Pirate fleets used guerrilla tactics that confounded Council military doctrine. Younger species chafed under restrictions that prevented them from exploring or innovating. Some sectors were openly discussing withdrawal from the Council's authority. The Outcast Alliance had not remained idle during their 75 years of exile. While the Council maintained their perfect order through stagnation, the exiles had been forced to adapt, innovate, and overcome challenges that would have destroyed less resilient species. The result was a confederation of beings who had learned to thrive in conditions that the Council considered impossible to survive. Commander Elena Rodriguez, granddaughter of the original ambassador Elena Vasquez, commanded the diplomatic corps that maintained relations with the various exile species. Unlike her grandmother, Elena had never known life within the galaxy proper. She had been born in the void and raised among beings that the Council considered too dangerous for civilized society. To her, the idea that anyone would voluntarily limit their potential to satisfy bureaucratic concerns was incomprehensible. The human colonies that dotted the void regions were marvels of engineering and adaptation. New Terra had been built inside an artificial star, its cities floating in controlled plasma that provided both energy and protection from the hostile environment outside. The Foundry worlds existed in dimensions where matter itself could be reshaped at the atomic level, allowing for construction projects that defied conventional physics. Garden Station was a living ecosystem that had learned to feed on dark matter, creating an oasis of life in the empty reaches of space. Admiral Kim's strategic analyses indicated that the time for hiding was coming to an end. Human expansion had reached the point where contact with the galaxy proper was inevitable. Scout ships reported increased Council activity along the border regions, suggesting that they were finally becoming aware that something significant was happening in the corner. Void. The question was no longer whether humanity would return to the galaxy, but when and how. Dr. Liu's research teams had made another crucial discovery while studying the quantum foam that filled the spaces between galaxies. The void was not empty, as the Council believed, but filled with a form of dark energy that could be harnessed as a power source. Human technology had learned to tap directly into the fundamental forces that drove cosmic expansion, giving them access to energy levels that made stellar fusion seem primitive by comparison. The Outcast Alliance had grown into something that the Galactic Council had never anticipated. Rather than dying out or remaining weak and isolated, the exiled species had formed a confederation that rivaled the Council in scope and surpassed it in technological capability. The void that was supposed to be their prison had become their sanctuary, allowing them to develop without the restrictions that limited Council species. Chancellor Park convened a meeting of the Alliance leadership to discuss their next steps. Representatives from all 17 exile species gathered in the quantum conference chamber aboard New Genesis, their diverse forms reflecting the incredible variety of life that had been rejected by the galaxy proper. The Time Singers existed as probability clouds that shifted through multiple potential futures. The crystal minds appeared as geometric patterns that thought in mathematical concepts beyond organic comprehension. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental difference between the Alliance and the Council. Rather than seeking consensus through endless deliberation, the exile species engaged in dynamic discussion that embraced conflict and contradiction as paths to better solutions. Ideas were tested through argument and refined through challenge, creating policies that were robust enough to survive contact with reality. Admiral Kim presented intelligence suggesting that several Council species were experiencing internal conflicts that could lead to open rebellion. The younger generations of many species were asking why they should accept limitations that seemed arbitrary and unnecessary. Some were even expressing interest in making contact with the Exile Alliance, curious about what they might learn from beings who had been forced to think outside the established order. The decision reached by the Alliance leadership was both simple and revolutionary. Rather than continuing to hide in the void, they would begin making selective contact with Council species that showed signs of being ready for change. Not as supplicants seeking readmission to galactic society, but as equals offering partnership. To those willing to embrace new possibilities, Dr. Liu's quantum fold technology would make this possible by allowing Alliance ships to appear anywhere in the galaxy instantaneously, bypassing the Council's border defenses entirely. The exile species would no longer be contained by the arbitrary boundaries that had been imposed on them decades earlier. They would go where they chose, when they chose, and offer their knowledge to those willing to receive it. The final preparations began immediately. Admiral Kim's fleets moved into position at strategic points throughout the void, ready to support diplomatic missions with overwhelming force if necessary. Dr. Liu's research teams prepared technology packages that could revolutionize entire civilizations overnight. Commander Rodriguez's diplomatic corps practiced approaches that would appeal to species that had never imagined alternatives to Council authority. Chancellor Park stood once more in the command center of New Genesis, watching as humanity's greatest fleet prepared for its return to the galaxy that had once rejected them. 75 years earlier, his people had been cast out as dangerous failures who threatened the established order. Now they returned as the leaders of an alliance that had accomplished things the Council considered impossible. The irony was perfect. In trying to protect themselves from humanity's dangerous potential, the Council had given them the freedom to realize it fully. The exile that was meant to contain the human threat had instead created something far more revolutionary. The galaxy was about to discover that the species they had cast into the darkness had not only survived, but had learned to make the darkness itself into a source of power. As New Genesis engaged its quantum fold drive and disappeared into the space between dimensions, David Park smiled. The age of exile was ending. The age of the Alliance was about to begin. And the Galactic Council was going to learn what humanity had always known. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is tell humans that something is impossible. Asterisk.